أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So let's get started with checking questions. And checking questions, these ones specifically, are going to be building up from the last few sessions, or last session, specifically on the idea of choices, having too many choices in analysis paralysis, but also they ultimately tie into the overall picture of how, like some situations of stress, anxiety, and all that stuff comes in. So all the stuff that we've talked about so far, sort of putting it down into scenarios, but now specifically starting off with your individual experiences, because that can also help you connect with other people when you're helping them or when you're trying to be there for them and so on. So kind of being more mindful of the experiences that you go through can help you, inshallah. So with that, the questions are: how are you? How was your weekend? Are you content with your life events since our last interaction? So over the weekend, let's say, are you content with everything that happened, or are you not happy with those things, right? There is a slight difference between contentment and happiness, but for the sake of this, let's just keep going with what I said. And then, is analysis paralysis something that you experience? If it is, then like, what do you think are the causes, and how are you addressing them? Now, there's a difference between coping with something, which is sort of putting a band-aid or something on something, but then there is also dealing with something in a way of actually fixing it at the root, at the core, right? So that's the difference of between the two. So there's a treatment, which is sort of like addressing the just the issue itself on the surface, so bandaging it. Then there's also curing something. Curing in mental health context, curing is not something that is very widespread at the moment, because the research and data and stuff is very limited, and so a lot of mental health related stuff is going to be treatment based. And some of it may be more like curing, but a lot of it is actually more treatment based. And treatment may give you, for example, how to cope with things, how to manage stress and things like that, but it's not gonna necessarily at this point, for the most part, it seems that it may not give us solutions in terms of resolving the underlying causes of things, right? Because they're still trying to identify potential causes of depression. Some of the recent data or the research has started to show that some of the stuff may not be, what was initially assumed as intergenerational transmission of, mental health issues, as in like it's something that you get from your parents or whatever. If they had issues, then you're likely to get it. Some of the new research is starting to show that it may not actually be that simple. It may be that the environment that you're living in as a child, for example, your environment, which might be toxic, might actually make you more susceptible to certain things because of certain impact on your epigenetic factors. The epigenetic factors are things that influence the way your DNA is expressed, the way your genes are expressed, but they don't actually necessarily change the DNA itself. So it may be that your environment, and it seems to be more and more like this, also in the context of schools and things like that, that your environment plays a role in terms of how your genes are expressed, and that's something that may, for example, including how you eat, like what you eat, how you live, and stuff, right, may actually transmit to your kids. But the good thing is that epigenetic factors seem to be reversible. Whereas obviously, if you had genes and like whatever that are fixed, they may not be changeable. But with epigenetic factors, that's a good thing and stuff. So whereas it was thought in the past that it's sort of like fixed and you're sort of like likely to get the same things and stuff that your parents have, now there's a lot more research on in the past like few years on epigenetic factors, which may actually have a lot of contributing a lot of contribution when it comes to okay. Is there still ticking sound in the back? Okay. Okay, that's good. I don't know what that was, but anyways, if you hear it again, let me know, inshallah, and then we'll go from there. So with this, just something to note about epigenetic factors. So keep that in mind, that your environment seems to be having more impact than it was previously thought, and it can impact how your genes are expressed. It can impact your health conditions. It can be passed on to your kids, it seems. But the good thing is that it doesn't mean that it's fixed. That even if it's passed down to from the parent to the kids, even then it doesn't mean that it's not changeable. In fact, it can actually be changed and stuff in reverse. So this is good news if it actually gets more momentum and more research and so on. It could be that this actually starts making it where a lot of diseases that we thought were hereditary may be hereditary to the extent that they might be epigenetics, as opposed to um, fixed DNA transfer where it's like you are forced to have this disease and so on. So um, let's see how this stuff goes in the future. But there's hope in this, inshallah, because of that. So just some things to mention over here about how your mindset, your environment, and things like that that you have some control over are actually impacting the way your life might be, as opposed to something that you're sort of stuck with because you're born with it and so on. So with that, um, is analysis process something that you experience? Do you have anxiety when making decisions, and why? And how does it relate to contentment? So all of this stuff. I usually put something over here, so I put simplify today. So the question is, or the frame is, a person reaches out to you about not knowing what to do in life. They find themselves at a crossroads and don't know what to do and how to do it. Whatever they need to do, they don't know what to do first of all, and they don't know how to do whatever they need to do and stuff, right? They're so confused. They're so overwhelmed. There's so many choices because of so much information they have acquired or have been given. So sometimes, you might have actually tried to research so much and stuff, and now you're confused because you don't know how to connect or synthesize all that information, right? Or you've been given so much information by so many different people. Somebody's telling you do this, somebody else is talking about this, and somebody's also telling you about this, and all that, right? And you just get overwhelmed. Okay, what do I do now, right? So, like for example, let's say that you want to buy certain clothes and stuff, right? And so somebody told you that, okay, if you buy this clothes, it's going to support this company right here. And then somebody else says, okay, if you buy this clothes and stuff, it's going to make you look like these people and stuff. Somebody else is going to say, if you buy these other set of clothes and stuff, it's going to make you like whatever and stuff, right? And then you're also thinking about you have rules about how in terms of how you have what do you call it like your arrogance and things like that and stuff, right? Um, so you're like, okay, what should I wear and stuff? I have so many things to account for, so many things that I can choose between and stuff, and I don't know what to do and stuff. And you sort of just give up, and you're like, you know what? I just can't make a decision right now because everything I do, like maybe I buy this clothes, and maybe I ended up supporting these bad people and stuff, and then on the other hand, I might buy these clothes and stuff, and then it makes me look like an arrogant person and stuff. And if I buy these and stuff, maybe my heart is gonna get messed up or whatever. Like, what do I do and stuff? You're just so overwhelmed. So how can they navigate this dilemma? And what would you do in terms of helping this person, or even if you were in a situation like that? So think about this. Think about your personal reflections in the previous slide. Yeah, panic. And yes, actually, this is a real thing. Panic attacks happen like this. So just keep that in mind. And people do actually get overwhelmed, and they start panicking. There are some people, even kids, because they're expecting a certain scenario or a certain experience, before getting into that experience, they actually start panicking because they don't know what's going to happen. They might have had a sort of a trauma that caused this to happen. And trauma can be multiple different ways, right? Because trauma could also be in terms of you feel so bad because you couldn't make a decision, and how incompetent you felt. You felt incapable of doing anything, and so you became overwhelmed in that situation. And so every time your brain tries to make you avoid that situation, so you don't feel the same way. Again, your brain is trying to help you out, but it gets customized, so it helps you prevent those situations that are going to be situation where you're going to feel bad again, right? So it makes sense for the brain to do that, to scare you away from those things. But at the same time, how can we manually go in and just kind of adjust some of the things so that we can actually act in new situations in a different way than in previous history, like how we've been doing it? Because not every situation is going to be the same. In the same situation, yeah, it makes sense. If you got bit by a lion, um, and then you just see a line again, it makes sense for you to be traumatic in the same experience. But if it's behind a cage, for example, behind a glass, whatever, like a block or whatever, then in that case, maybe it's not the same thing anymore. So you can start retraining your mind a little bit differently with the new data point and adding more value to it by saying, hey, new information, this actually is more updated and stuff, this has new situation or whatever. So keep those things in mind. In the meantime, let's get to the videos really quick. We'll just review this really quick. Remember to be honest and raw with yourself. That's very important. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to move forward because you're not like actually addressing what needs to be addressed because you're not acknowledging where you're at. And some of these things. So if you're a failure, injury, remember we talked about trauma. So like in this case, that would be fear of injury, having unrealistic expectations, or magnified sort of negative expectations and stuff and so on. Just keep some of these things in mind, inshallah. And again, motivation, remember, am I going to be motivated to do something? Well, do I feel confident in my ability to navigate that situation or not? If I feel like I'm going to become overwhelmed with the number of choices I have to address, then no, I'm not going to feel confident. I'm not going to actually do it. So I'm not going to be motivated to go through that process. I'm going to try to avoid it. And then here, discipline can help you because you can actually adjust your process, your mindset and stuff like that, manually transform, Okay, so brain games time. Pick one.
The one on the left.
This one? Okay, Roma has interest. Okay. Thoughts on this one?
I feel like a lot of what he was saying was really relatable, and the examples were quite vivid, which I think is beneficial in making an impact. I mean, I was thinking about it from a speechwriter perspective, so I think he did a really good job in that sense of demonstrating, specifically talking about like the element of like what does it take for a person to like really recognize themselves, and it's usually not when they're thriving.
Yeah. Other comments? Okay, let me go to this really quick. All right. So thoughts on that one, really quick before we close, inshallah. And you can have any questions that you might have, initial comments or thoughts on this question right here, this one, and we can see going forward. So notice over here, I have an underlying thing right here that I didn't actually. So there is something that I'm trying to connect between all these things. So I don't know if anybody saw this, but notice the stuff that he was talking about like people not really knowing themselves, or at least not as well as they think, right? And then they actually might make up an answer as they go, right? They haven't thought through things, for example, or they have thought through something, but like they don't really understand why they are still doing it and so on. In this particular situation, looking at the context of choice and this other, thing about like the confusion and the chaos and not having sort of role models and stuff like that, all that stuff over here, how do we synthesize all that information together in this context and in our own personal lives related to these questions over here that we were asking just a little bit before that? So you don't have to answer these questions today. I do intend to keep this inshallah for the next time, but any initial thoughts that you would like to share, go ahead.
Wait, could you repeat the question? Are we reviewing the video or are we answering the questions on the slide?
Either one. But the most important thing is like, if you have any comments on any of the videos, go ahead. If you want to synthesize the information in the context of these two sets of questions, you can also start doing that, but it's not like we don't have to finish this today. I do intend to continue this next time, inshallah. So whatever you want, either the videos or trying to attempt to like synthesize the information in this context.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel equipped to answer these questions still, but yeah, I don't have anything to fulfill with the questions at this point in time.
No problem. There was there's a lot of stuff that was going on. Just this would be a question that you would have to synthesize all the information in, and then propose some sort of in this particular context with this particular person. But also you can start sort of personally thinking about these things that you can that can resonate with you, and then see how you can also use personal understanding and experience to in the alongside the stuff that we watched, to then go ahead and propose something here with this person. But if you like more time to think about it, but then we'll go ahead and pause here, inshallah, and then we'll continue next time. And if you're confused about any of the videos, let me know and then I can kind of give you a summary. Actually, let me do that anyways. So this video right here is talking about how there are certain individuals that we, when things are kind of falling apart, the people that have figured things out, they've gotten purpose in their life, they have joy in their life and so on, how we can use them as role models, the people that are actually content and they found contentment in their life, satisfaction and so on. How can we learn lessons from them that can actually help us as the rest of society benefit in a positive way, right? And then in this case, right, and why there's a need for role models, and why it's important to have role models that have certain qualities and not just arbitrary role models and stuff, right? And then why and how we choose. This was a discussion on how we think that we know something, we think we want something, but we may really not want that, or maybe we're just arbitrarily selecting a reason to justify our actions and stuff, right? So how does that impact the choices that we make? How does that impact in terms of like the perception of how things are going to look like in the future if we make a particular decision or choice or whatever? How can it be that like if we are making choices not really in practice thinking about the consequences, and then realizing that either of the choices would have probably given us the same end result because we would have figured out how to make it work in the future? Like when the two pictures were shown, and then the person would pick one, but the opposite picture was actually given and the person still came up with a reason why they picked that picture, right? Not realizing it was a different picture they were actually commenting on, right? But they still made sense of it. So that is something where we might actually make a choice between like 2-3 choices, but then whatever ends up happening, maybe we can actually in the future make sense of it. So this is a sort of like trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that okay, you make a choice and stuff, you try to do your action plan and stuff, but at the end of the day, whatever happens, how can you justify it in a way that actually keeps you going, in a positive way? So how can you use that as a positive tool, right? Also just understanding how people tend to make choices, or sometimes they might over exaggerate the weight of a decision that they make or a choice that they have in front of them, when in reality it would have been all the same because they would have just made it work out at the end of the day, whatever ended up happening. So how does that impact, how can that potentially help in terms of managing stress and anxiety and so on? But also, what are some things that we can take from it in terms of why people might be stuck in situations like this? So how we can avoid that as well in the future. Just overall, some things to keep in mind in the context of choices. Sometimes we have a lot of choices, we pick one, and then we just make sense of it, even if it's not exactly like what we thought, whatever. But then other people may sort of like get stuck in analyzing and trying to figure out which one is the best one and stuff, when functionally they could have just picked any of those options and just made them work. Does that make sense? If the second video confused you, like I can give more details, inshallah, but for now I hope that summary helped in terms of the main lessons from it. How people's minds are actually very malleable, and we can actually manually go back and edit the memories or the the frameworks that we have, or the perceptions and ideas that we have, that we are thinking, that we're basing our opinions on. How we can actually manually adjust that, and also how oftentimes we might be overcomplicating things when in reality they don't need to be. They don't need to be overcomplicated. We could just be like, okay, well, let me just pick one of those two options and I'll just go with it and I'll just make it work at the end. In other words, how can some of these problems be our own doing, like our own, how can they be like the result of our own construction, essentially? I hope that made sense. If not, you can let me know, inshallah. If it did make sense, or if you just need more time to go back at it, then that's okay, inshallah. Yeah, how we frame things to start off things, but also how we end up framing what ends up happening. So let's say you had to pick between two options, and you just picked randomly, flipped a coin and pick one, and then you just made sense out of it, right? Because the idea was that when he was showing the two pictures, they were actually getting the opposite picture, the one they did not want. And then they gave the same explanation. They still gave an explanation for why they picked it. So this was showing that they actually didn't pick it because of a particular reason. They were trying to make sense of why they picked it after they had been given, after they had been asked why they picked it. So they just randomly pick something. So again, choices, you just randomly pick a choice. And then at the end, they try to justify why that one was the case. Remember the one in the earring? The person actually picked the other one, and then later on they justified it by saying, this person, I like earrings. So that was sort of like, you could not have done that because the first person had no earrings. So the idea is people can interpret events in the way they would like to. So it's like a mindset issue, but it's just a matter of like when they don't do it, or when they choose the wrong explanation because they choose to interpret it that way. So your interpretation of your events can have an impact. This also goes back right here. Are you content with your life events since our last interaction? And then leading up to this question right here too. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go ahead and continue next time, inshallah, but I hope this gave you some time to think about some things to think about. And we'll continue next time, inshallah, with a little bit more of like how to narrow down choices and how to effectively prioritize and so on. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.